The situation unfolding between the United States and Venezuela in the Caribbean has entered one of its most volatile phases in years. The build-up of military forces, the sudden expansion of counter-narcotics operations, high-stakes diplomatic exchanges, and increasingly sharp rhetoric from both governments have created a moment where a single miscalculation could dramatically alter the regional landscape. What is happening now is the culmination of long-simmering tensions, but the pace and intensity of recent developments mark a turning point with global implications. In the waters stretching from Puerto Rico to the Colombian coast, U.S. naval power is now unmistakable. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier ever deployed by the United States, sits at the center of an expansive strike group that includes destroyers, aircraft, and support vessels. Nearly 15,000 sailors and Marines are operating in the region, conducting patrols and readiness drills that the U.S. government describes as defensive and counter-narcotics in nature. But to Venezuelan officials, the message is clear: the United States is positioning itself for possible offensive action. The announcement from Washington that Venezuelan leadership has been designated as part of a foreign terrorist organization has dramatically escalated the confrontation. U.S. officials argue that senior figures in Caracas, including those in the highest levels of government and military, have direct links to narcotics organizations responsible for transporting large quantities of illegal drugs into the United States. This designation is more than symbolic. It opens the door to expanded sanctions, covert operations, and potential military action justified as counter-terrorism. Recent U.S. military activity demonstrates how quickly that new authority is being used. Over the past several months, more than 20 vessels originating from Venezuela have been targeted and destroyed by American forces. Officials describe these vessels as smugglers, fast boats, and improvised craft used to transport drugs northwards. Casualties have been reported, though Washington insists the strikes were confined to vessels engaged in illicit activity. Venezuelan officials dispute this and accusing the United States of violating international law and conducting unilateral military actions in foreign waters. Even more concerning is the direct communication between the U.S. president and Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro. Their exchange was acknowledged but not detailed publicly. What little has emerged suggests that the U.S. leader issued stern warnings about what Washington views as Venezuela's complicity in regional drug trafficking networks. One of the statements that has since drawn global attention is the U.S. President's remark that countries involved in illegal drug production or trafficking could be subject to military action. Land strikes against countries with any illegal drug production could start soon, he said. That warning has reverberated throughout Latin America, where many governments worry that the line between counter-narcotics operations and political intervention may be blurring. Venezuela, already under immense economic pressure, now faces the possibility that its territory could come under U.S. attack for the first time since the Cold War era. At the center of this crisis is Nicolás Maduro, who has ruled Venezuela since 2013. At 63 years old, he commands a government that has become increasingly isolated from Western democracies, yet remains deeply entwined with major global powers such as China, Russia, and Iran. Maduro's political trajectory from bus driver and union figure to foreign minister, vice president under Hugo Chavez, and ultimately president has been marked by periods of both mass support and intense controversy. Opposition groups, international observers, and Western governments have repeatedly accused his administration of electoral manipulation, human rights violations, and involvement in illicit drug operations. Despite these allegations, Maduro has maintained a firm grip on power. His supporters argue that he is the target of an ongoing foreign campaign to destabilize Venezuela and seize its vast oil reserves. Maduro, for his part, has openly framed the U.S. military buildup as an imperialist attempt to dominate the region. In a recent public address, he declared his unwavering loyalty to his country. "I swear absolute loyalty to the Venezuelan people," he said, framing the confrontation as a struggle for sovereignty, dignity, and national survival. Inside Venezuela, The political climate is marked by suspicion and resistance. Government loyalists, security units, and civilian militias have been mobilized in what officials describe as a defensive posture. The country has endured years of economic hardship, hyperinflation, declining oil production, mass unemployment, and severe shortages of essential goods. These internal pressures have triggered one of the largest migration waves in modern Latin American history, with millions of Venezuelans crossing into neighboring countries or attempting dangerous journeys northward. Analysts who study the region emphasize that the country's economic collapse has deepened its vulnerability to illicit networks. Criminal groups involved in drug trafficking have expanded their role, often taking advantage of weakened institutions and poorly resourced security forces. One expert described the government's evolution starkly, saying Maduro's leadership has become hyper-radicalized, deeply repressive, and increasingly reliant on illicit revenue streams. Another warned that any attempt by the US to conduct land strikes inside Venezuela would almost certainly trigger a wider regional conflict, potentially drawing in allies and destabilizing communities already stretched by economic hardship. Despite this, the United States appears committed to maintaining sustained pressure. Officials in Washington argue that the current approach is needed to protect American citizens from drug trafficking and to disrupt what they see as a government-sanctioned criminal enterprise operating under the guise of sovereignty. Behind closed doors, discussions continue about how far the United States is prepared to go and what thresholds would trigger deeper military involvement. The closure of Venezuelan airspace ordered by Washington is an additional sign of how serious the confrontation has become. The move has disrupted commercial flights, humanitarian operations, and regional travel, creating uncertainty for families, airline companies, and governments across the Americas. The Venezuelan government has condemned the decision, calling it an illegal act of aggression designed to isolate the country and sow panic among its citizens. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean basin, the U.S. Navy's presence continues to grow. Patrol aircraft circle the region, destroyers track maritime traffic, and the USS Gerald R. Ford remains poised with its battle group. The deployment serves as a deterrent, but also as a signal that Washington is willing to escalate if it believes its warnings are being ignored. The carrier's aircraft conduct routine takeoff and landing drills, but they also monitor activity along Venezuela's coastline, movements of military units, foreign vessels, and suspected smuggling operations. Venezuela's leadership has responded by conducting military exercises of its own, deploying air defense systems, and rehearsing scenarios involving an amphibious assault. State media broadcast images of soldiers training in coastal regions, alongside speeches warning citizens to prepare for what may lie ahead. For many Venezuelans, the threat of confrontation is not abstract. It is a daily source of anxiety layered on top of the economic hardships that have already pushed the country to the breaking point. Diplomatic channels, though strained, have not been entirely shut down. Some regional governments have called for an emergency summit to de-escalate the situation. Others argue that the crisis is the result of years of political gridlock inside Venezuela and that any long-term solution must involve internal reform rather than external force. Yet these proposals face resistance from all sides. Venezuela sees them as attempts to undermine its sovereignty, while Washington remains skeptical that diplomacy alone can address what it calls a narcotics terror network operating at a national scale. One of the more complicated dimensions of the crisis is Venezuela's international alliances. Over the past decade, the country has strengthened ties with China, selling oil to Beijing, often under discounted long-term agreements. These deals have provided critical revenue, but have also made Venezuela increasingly reliant on a limited number of global partners. This has worried US strategists who see China's growing presence in the region as part of a broader strategic competition. The Caribbean, long considered a US sphere of influence, is now the setting for intersecting geopolitical rivalries that extend well beyond narcotics or territorial disputes. In this climate, both superpowers are watching closely. Russia, which maintains security ties with Venezuela, has criticized the US buildup and called for restraint. China has urged respect for sovereignty and opposed unilateral sanctions. These global reactions illustrate how a bilateral standoff between Washington and Caracas could, under certain conditions, spill into a wider confrontation if not carefully managed. For ordinary Venezuelans, the crisis adds another layer of uncertainty to an already precarious existence. Families wait in long lines for food and fuel, businesses struggle to survive amid shortages, and hospitals operate with limited supplies. The country's economy, once buoyed by some of the world's largest oil reserves, remains crippled by declining production, mismanagement, and sanctions. The fear of military action and the devastation it could bring hangs heavily over communities trying to navigate daily life. The United States, too, faces risks. While its military is vastly more powerful, analysts warn that intervention could lead to unintended consequences. A sustained conflict would involve complex terrain, densely populated cities, fortified positions, and armed civilian groups. Humanitarian costs could be severe, and political backlash could be felt across Latin America. For now, Washington insists that any military action would be targeted, precise, and justified under counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism authorities. But those assurances have not calmed regional fears. Back in Venezuela, Maduro's government remains defiant. Officials dismiss U.S. allegations as fabricated and politically motivated, pointing out that foreign powers have frequently used the language of counter-terrorism to justify intervention. They argue that the country is being punished for refusing to align with Washington's policies and for choosing a different economic and political path. Maduro's inner circle insists that the United States underestimates Venezuelan resilience and warns that any foreign attack would be met with national resistance. As both sides harden their positions, each new statement, military maneuver, or diplomatic move has the potential to shift the balance. Analysts emphasize that the current moment is extremely fragile. A minor incident at sea or a misinterpreted action along the coastline could trigger a chain reaction leading to open conflict. At the same time, the presence of powerful geopolitical actors, the scale of the US deployment, and the Venezuelan government's entrenched defensive posture mean that opportunities for de-escalation are shrinking. This confrontation is about far more than maritime patrols or counter-drug operations. It is a test of political endurance, international influence, and regional stability. Beneath the surface of military posturing lies a deeper contest over legitimacy, sovereignty, and the future direction of a region caught between economic desperation and geopolitical rivalry. Whether this moment eventually gives way to diplomacy or spirals toward conflict will depend on decisions made in the coming weeks, decisions that could shape the trajectory of the Americas for years to come. For now, the Caribbean remains a zone of heightened tension where warships, political declarations, and unspoken threats coexist in a volatile balance. And as long as the USS Gerald R. Ford stays positioned off the Venezuelan coast, and as long as Caracas continues preparing for what it calls defense against foreign aggression, the possibility of miscalculation remains dangerously real. For millions of people in the region, the hope is that leaders choose caution over confrontation, dialogue over escalation, and peace over a conflict that could leave lasting scars on both nations.